Just give a second for Laura to come in here. Welcome, Laura. We're just starting off. Glad you could join us. So today's session, we're going to be focusing on organizational culture 2.0. So we did some in our COP sessions before, and we're going to be building on that today. So just want to acknowledge that Race and Disability Canada recognizes the enduring legacy of colonization and oppression experienced by Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and Inuit Nunavut. Our team live and work on many traditional territories, and I know that you're all calling in as well today from different territories. So you're welcome to drop where you're calling in from in the chat if you'd like. And this acknowledgement is a reminder that our work to address the intersections of race and disability is deeply connected with Indigenous solidarity. We recognize that Indigenous people with disabilities, sorry, I went to a different slide, experience disproportionately high rates of discrimination and marginalization, and we're committed to working in unity for Indigenous rights. Our journey to uphold this commitment of solidarity is ongoing, and we strive to strengthen our efforts. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to be covering today. Oops, sorry, my slide dexterity isn't really working too well today. Let's try that again. Here we go. So what we're going to be covering today, we're going to look at very briefly what did we cover in Organizational Culture 1.0, and then we're going to be diving into our new topic today, which is the second round of organizational culture. We'll be looking at how white supremacy shapes the narrative. We'll do an interactive activity around this. We'll look at how we can apply this going forward, and then we'll do our closing and tick it out. So just want to do our introductions for today. I'm not going to actually introduce myself because I know that everybody here knows me and I introduced myself last time. So just want to give Amira a chance to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I think most of us have met. My name is Amira. I'm the Community Learning Coordinator for the Toronto Hub or Ontario Hub. Currently based in London, England, so it is evening time for me, just after dinner. Um, Originally from the Toronto area, and I cannot remember all of the social location that I give, but lived experience as a Black neurodivergent woman, and super excited for this session.
Thanks, Amira. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the screen here. So just doing a really brief recap on organizational culture 1.0, what we covered in the COP. Oops. So when we were looking at that, we're looking at different aspects of how white supremacy culture can show up in organizations. And these were the ones that we focused on. So we looked at perfectionism and sense of urgency, right? Everything needing to be done right now. The worship of the written word, so the idea that what's written is valued more highly than what isn't written down. In power hoarding, how especially people in positions of authority try to keep that power for themselves rather than distributing power more evenly in an organization. And then the right to comfort, so that the idea that we shouldn't, especially those in power, shouldn't feel discomfort, that there's something negative with feeling discomfort, and we need to keep people feeling comfortable, but this actually inhibits growth and change that's needed. So just a really brief recap on that. I'm curious if anybody has anything that you want to add on that, anything that's kind of coming to mind from the last session, or anything that you've worked on since then. Just want to give a little bit of an opportunity for any reflections or any thoughts before we dive into round two, if anybody has. No, okay, okay. Um, oops, sorry, so just share again. So we're going to dive in today to Organizational Culture 2.0. And what we're going to do is cover some more aspects of white supremacy culture in organizations and dive a little more deeply into those. Samira, I want to just pass it over to you to start us off with this. Oh, and then before that, sorry, I forgot about this. We're going to do a really brief poll. Let me just pull that up here. 1 second, just to give us a sense of where we're starting off from before we get into the session. So I'm just going to launch this. If you could take a second to quickly respond to the poll, that would be great before we dive in. Okay, great. Thanks so much. Okay, so let me go back in here. Okay, so just, yeah, passing it over to you, Mira.
Perfect. So I'll cover the first two of the four that we're introducing. So the first new characteristic of white supremacy culture is looking at quantity over quality. So what is that? So it's the assumption that the goal, or it's assumption or the goal that bigger or more is always better. So there's an emphasis on what we can objectively measure as something being more valuable than the quality of our relationships to all living beings. So what can this actually look like? So this can look like prioritizing reporting on numbers. Sorry, coming up from a bit of a cold. Reporting on numbers of people who use services rather than the impact of the services themselves. So really focusing in on the data, what numbers can we look at instead of testimonials or interpersonal relationships and connections. This looks like little or no value attached to the process itself. So if it can't be measured, it has no value. So maybe we're just measuring the outputs, and maybe the outputs themselves aren't amazing numbers, but the process and what we've learned from that is something very tangible, but we don't prioritize that. And also time spent in the workplace rather than work accomplished. So this is like a big problem in workplace culture generally, where the 9 to 5, we're really fixated on it. And it's not about the work, it's just about having to do more time, overtime versus the output. So the second one would be the either or. So this is the binary, reducing the complexities of life and the nuance of our relationships with each other and with all living things into this either or, yes or no, right or wrong ways that reinforce all the other tenets of urgency, one way, perfectionist thinking, and abuse of power. So really fixated on it's this or it's that, and there's nothing in between. And so this can look like trying to simplify complex things. For example, believing that poverty is a simple result of lack of education. So it's poverty is because of this, and there's no other kind of factors, or there's no gray area to understand something. Things are good or bad, right or wrong. You're either with us, you're against us. So it's these really hard lines. It really closely links to perfectionism because binary thinking makes it difficult for us to learn from our mistakes or accommodate conflict. Either you're right or you're wrong. That's it. You're the good guy or the bad guy. There's no area to kind of learn from that or self-reflect. And so conflict and an increased sense of urgency as people feel they have to make decisions to either do it this way or that way with no time or encouragement to consider alternatives, particularly for those who may require more time or more resources.
Thanks, Samira. Yeah, so moving on to the next one is paternalism. So that's the practice of people in power making all the decisions for the people that they govern, employ, or are responsible for, so that they cannot or don't have to make their own decisions. And it's said to be in the interest of the people that they're making the decisions for. And so those with power often don't think it's important or necessary to understand the viewpoint or experience of those for whom they're making the decisions. They are capable of making decisions for and in the interests of those without power because they have the power to do so. And then those without power don't really know how decisions get made and who makes what decisions, but yet at the same time, they're completely familiar with the impact of those decisions on them. The next one is about objectivity. So, this is the belief that there's such a thing as being objective or neutral, that we can view something without any bias, any judgment, or any prejudice. The belief that emotions are inherently destructive, irrational, and should not play a role in decision making or group process. We assign value to what we label as rational while invalidating or shaming the emotional, when often, if not always, the rational is emotion that's actually wrapped up in fancy logic and language. And then it's requiring people to think in a linear or logical fashion and ignoring or invalidating or shaming people who think in other ways. So those are the four that we wanted to talk about today. I'm just wondering, Amir, before we get into the next part, if we want to just see if people have any reflections or other examples that they can provide. Just want to open that up to people. Now, any reflections or other examples that you can think of that came to you when we were sharing?
What actually came to me while we were looking at this is that, sorry, I should have put my hand up.
No, no problem. Sorry, there was three at once. That was probably me. I should have said, oh, put your hand up.
I just feel so comfortable here already. So thank you for that. But it came to my mind was interesting because sometimes I'm noticing it's our staff that are asking for us to put these boxes in place. And it always surprises me, right? I'm just like, but I hadn't even thought about the fact that this is white supremacist thinking, but I've been so uncomfortable about, but you have the power to do that yourself. Why not take this power? But as I'm going down the list, I'm like checking every box in terms of, oh, this is how you want me to behave. This is how you want me to be. And I don't want to be that way. So I'm like, it's confirmation of like, okay, no, I shouldn't be this way. But also it's a real aha moment for me of the people that work for us can try to push us into this place and use the excuse of it's not my responsibility. You're the one that needs to be, like it's convincing. It's very convincing because I admit to sitting back and second guessing, am I doing this right? Like, should I be giving this much direction or right? But that you like all of it, check a box after box. I'm like, wow, that is so yeah. So we have a lot of work to do clearly with, just in terms of our management team being able to just sort of understand how to move differently. But yeah, and I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's just a real aha moment for me. So thank you.
Yeah,
I'll put my hand up now because Julia, I was kind of thinking along the same lines of, and I think the people that we're a pretty small organization, and we've got some people that are really very confident in being able to move forward and do things on their own, and are the first ones to take responsibility if something doesn't go the way that it should. But have there's a couple other people, and I think it's the same kind of situation. Like, they know their job, but if they don't get something done, it's an excuse that I didn't tell them to do it. And it came up not too long ago in something, and somebody hadn't finished something, and they said, well, we were waiting for your response. And I looked back and I said, there's no evidence here that you were waiting for my response. So tell me more about this. Like, how do you want things to come to you and stuff? But it's pretty easy sometimes to just let the responsibility be with others. And it takes it alleviates yours. And so it's a tough thing. I agree. Like, I second guess, and I've been around for a long time. Like, I second guess that why, like, what did I miss doing? And when I thought I didn't miss doing anything, it was how do I approach that in a way that's a learning and giving people not only the authority to make some decisions, but the responsibility. When there's not somebody right there to say what you should do next, practice. The practice and practice and practice making those kind of decisions. Some will work and some won't, and that's okay. So, but it's I don't think it has anything to do, it doesn't have anything to do with, I don't know, I was going to say it doesn't have anything to do with white supremacy, but when I look down here about this commitment to the worship of the written word, that's exactly what it is. Exactly. You didn't send me an email telling me I needed to do what I know that I need to do. So, yeah. So,
Yeah, thanks so much, Janet. And Julian, I just wanted to touch on something because I think what you said is really interesting. I think it does come back to the characteristic of paternalism, right?
mhm.
Because we've all been socialized into this culture that tells us that it's the people at the top that make the decisions. And so we
Mhm.
need to wait for direction. And so,
Yeah.
like, to actually be kind of unsocialized out of that is a process because that's what we're used to, this very hierarchical structure, and that's what it says, and that's how we do it. So we defer. And so I
Mhm.
think it actually takes a lot of effort to facilitate people taking that agency and responsibility and power, right? So we've all been socialized into that system. This
Mhm.
isn't just about
Mhm.
the leadership, you know, hoarding power, not giving power to others. It's about everybody being
Yeah.
socialized in the
Yeah,
system that
exactly.
says we wait for the people at the top to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Rita, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, just reflecting the hoarding versus giving the autonomy. And then, but there's a bit of a, I think sometimes there's a bit of a fear to take the autonomy,
Mhm.
meaning like if there is a mistake made, how is that handled? And so not necessarily in our organizations per se, but it could be like even like a feeling of trust within a team. And so it depends on your leader. So if your leader's like, it's okay, I got your back, you can make mistakes because that's how we grow, versus you did it and I'm going to leave you to, hang to dry and it's your fault. Um, so I was thinking about that, just the hoarding versus giving the autonomy, but maybe the fear from taking the autonomy, what that means. And then the second thing, from an HR perspective, I always, I love to see like the relationship piece because there's sometimes a bit of a dichotomy in a workplace where there's this focus on your goals and your metrics and your outputs and your outcomes, and they're required, but it's always for me also the how. And so the how is your relationships and your tasks and your people. So what are you putting first? And so just looking at like the white supremacy and then like the paternalistic pieces, quite very interesting for me to think about that extra component. So not really anything other than just an observation for me to kind of think about this and more deeper. And the linear thinking too, because yes, everybody has their own way of thinking, and the value of being very concise, whether you're written or speaking, plus a linear thought. Not everybody can think and compose their thoughts in a well executed sentence in front of people. I always admire those that can. But yeah, not everybody can do it, but sometimes you get rewarded or promoted based on, providing that kind of those kind of skill sets and experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Rita. And I think what you said is really important about like, if it's like, yeah, take the authority or make the decision, but then the fear of like, well, what happens if I do something wrong? Which is kind of interesting too, because it goes back to perfectionism, right? Like we got to get it all right. Like all these things are kind of like all tied together. So I think it's about like how do we deconstruct those things so there's a workplace where, everybody has agency, everyone can take responsibility. We're here to learn and grow. It's okay if you make a mistake. So it's there all of these things are connected. And it's interesting how when you kind of have a conversation, you just see more and more how connected they all It's really interesting. Yeah, Amir, I want to just pass it back to you if you have any reflections, and then I know you want to move into the
Oh,
next piece.
sure. I also wanted to see, Laura, I saw that you're taking notes. I don't mean to specifically call you out, but I was curious if you had anything to add. If not, I can jump back in.
Well, huh, you know, it's always my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's your fault. This has happened because, and as Janet said, you go back and you look through your journal and you look through your emails, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, what are you even talking about, right? Well, no, it's your fault, and I'm not going to be a sitting duck. I don't want to be pulled under the bus, and it's kind of that balance between for us, between stop and stop expectation and board expectation, where I find generally the board, everything that you said about, identifying white supremacy. That's my board. That's my board. And as you try to sort of maneuver your way out of being the sitting duck, it's very challenging. It's very challenging to dispel some of those myths and misconceptions about how it should be and how it actually is, and how it's different maybe than how it used to be. Particularly we have one new board member, just a month old, and there was some concern raised before he joined us that he's kind of old school. He's an older gentleman and he's a bit old school. And in just a few weeks, he's really old school. He's really old school, and it's just finding, well, that's not quite how we do it anymore, Anyway, just
Yeah, I think it's just jump in here too. Is like sometimes it's that you don't test your interpretation. So you're at something, you hear a lot of things, go back and you get busy doing something else, and it might be sometime afterwards where you have to go back and think, like, what was it that we really said about that? And I think that it's that just drive to get so many things checked off in a day that sometimes that's where the problem is we've just rushed through it, even like in our own heads. And what was true a week ago might not be true today. And we don't, sometimes that's a hard concept as well too. I just had that experience with my granddaughter who just turned 13, saying two things can be true at the same time. And she's at this place where no, it's fairness, there's one way. And we didn't get very far into the conversation, but I was just sort of saying, yeah, like, don't think that you always have to believe exactly what you believe today. That test that, just always question yourself too. So it's across the board with, it has nothing to, I don't know if it has anything to do with people getting older or being really young or whatever. It's just that kind of thing of, and maybe it's like that security we need to hold on to something that we really believed in just a short while ago. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think you've all made such good points, and all of that really makes me think of, it comes back to the perfectionism again when we're really holding on to the beliefs of, I'm a good person, this is a good belief, so the perfect belief, I have to stick with it. And again, it's, as you said, if two things can be true at once, that either or thinking of, no, it can't. There's one right and there isn't. Or as Laura said, it's their fault or it's my fault. So that's how it will be framed. And what if fault is, a really heavy word? Is it always so clear? So thank you all for sharing. I will hop into the continued parts here. Oh, good. Okay. So with these tenets of white supremacy culture, we'll be looking into how that shapes the narrative within idea spaces. Oh, good. There we go. Okay, so in terms of shaping the narrative and defining what is normal. So we're bringing this into something that's really topical. So right now we're seeing this wave of narrative control across institutions and across sectors. And the story is sort of shifting about DEI, EDI, from it being something that's necessary to it now being considered something that's divisive. And so that shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens through these cultural traits, the few of which we've just named. And if we don't name the narrative tactics, we risk reproducing them. So it shapes the narrative first in terms of who gets to speak. So narratives decide who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets to be believed, whose stories are validated as true. White supremacy culture often values data over lived experience, quantity over quality, written word, objectivity over emotion, and whiteness as the default storyteller. This shapes our social norms, organizational culture, and even laws. Shaping the narrative in terms of power and speech. So one of the most powerful tools of white supremacy culture is the ability to shape the story. So the ability to decide what gets talked about and how it's framed and who gets heard. And so we'll look at some of the tenets of white supremacy culture and how they may intersect with idea initiatives. So looking at quantity over quality. So there's this more recently, especially an emphasis on numerical targets, as we mentioned before. So maybe hiring quotas without fostering inclusive environments. It's really just about hitting our numbers. Prioritizing the number of EDI or idea trainings over their effectiveness or impact. So this is something that will often pop up with organizations of we have to do this for our grant reporting. We did it, checkbox, but we're not really looking at the processes and change, just that we have completed the task. And focusing on metrics like event attendance rather than meaningful engagement or systemic change. So if 100 people don't come, it's not a successful event versus if 3 people come and it's completely life-changing to them. And so the consequences of this can be within quantity over quality, can be tokenism, where individuals from marginalized groups are included in order to meet quotas without genuine inclusion, superficial compliance with EDI goals, and lacking depth and sustainability. In shaping the narrative, looking at the either or thinking. So this can look like framing issues as binary terms, such as racist versus not racist. This is a really big one right now. Something is racist or it's not racist. There's no room to kind of have a discussion about it or to understand that not everything is hardlined one way or the other. So it just doesn't acknowledge any of the complexities in these issues. It looks like implementing policies that assume there's a one-size-fits-all solution and ignores the intersectional experience. And it's a resistance to feedbacks. So viewing critique as opposition rather than an opportunity to growth. And so the consequences of this can be oversimplification of social issues, especially right now. We see this a lot with the term, let's say, woke. That's like a divisive term. What it means to people is we're well past that, but that label will be thrown on things of it is, a social issue. It's not a social issue, and we don't really understand the nuance. And it looks like marginalized voices that don't fit into these neatly predefined, the marginalization of voices that don't fit into neatly predefined categories. Through paternalism, narrative shaping looks like decisions about EDI initiatives without input made from those most affected. So top-down approach, and this is what we think everybody needs. There's an assumption of what marginalized groups need without actually consulting those groups, and implementing top-down approaches that lack community engagement, which connects back to our community engagement section. It's all interconnected. And so the consequences of this are disempowerment of these marginalized communities, removing their agency, and EDI initiatives that miss the mark due to lack of relevant insight. Again, just trying to hit our markers without actually sustainable change. Through objectivity. Am I going too quickly, or is this a good? I have a tendency to speed run, so I like to check in. So through narrative shaping, the valuing data and neutral or objective perspectives over lived experiences, dismissing emotional responses as unprofessional or irrelevant, and relying solely on quantitative metrics to assess DEI progress. And I just want to kind of highlight when we're speaking about emotional responses, I think the word emotional sometimes we kind of see it as extreme. So it's this big reaction of crying, it's this big angry reaction, but when we're speaking about emotional responses within this context, it's anything that is just not considered a neutral affect. So even a really excited response is emotional. Anything that's sort of giving you individuality and personality is considered an emotional response in opposition to objectivity. And so more consequences, the invalidation of personal narratives and experiences of discrimination, and the invisibility of systemic issues that aren't easily quantifiable. That kind of comes back to our initial kind of discussion when we even started the COP of the experience of Indigenous, Black, racialized people with disabilities. If we're not even getting that data, we can't necessarily quantify those individual experiences. And so it's just completely wiped over and those experiences remain invisible. And so the impacts of all of this narrative shaping is when discomfort is avoided and perfectionism dominates, we polish harm and silence dissent. Institutions will often say, we're inclusive, while policies and behaviors tell a different story. And so the bottom line, these traits keep the status quo safe and keep transformation out of reach. Before we get into an interactive activity, that was quite a lot of information, I'm sure, maybe a lot to think about, maybe not. I'm curious if maybe we have like a few minutes, just if anyone has any insights or reflections or anything that kind of came up. Please, Jen.
Okay. It was just something that came up in the last slide or so that just made me think about how, sure if I even can articulate this, but and I'm like argument is has different meanings for different people. So sometimes you're arguing because you really are at odds with somebody and there's a whole bunch of emotion that is there and that person's wrong and you're right or whatever that is, that really high emotional kind of thing. And then there's other times that you just really are making a good argument for something and that kind of thing. But I think that that word argument and the word emotional is at the root of a lot of problems because in most of our work, if we're working sort of in the social justice, there really is you can't take away the emotional reaction that you have to the stories that you're hearing. And when you're with somebody, like we provide advocacy, and when we're with somebody that is really struggling around something, you can't hold back your emotions. It's on your face, even if you're on screen, people will see that. When you're working with them, when you're going to people within the government to make an argument why just a little bit more funding might help this person in so many ways that down the road they're going to benefit. That might not be tomorrow that's the benefit, but it's down the road. And I just think that there's a lot of discomfort, and I'll hear people say, I'm just no good at advocacy. And yet when you listen to them tell the impact of what is happening in their life or their loved one's life that's causing so many problems, they're some of the best advocates I've ever heard, and so I think that I don't know where it fits within this white supremacy. I think that there are definitely some people that, and it could be a cultural thing, they're really quite at ease at arguing and calling each other names and all that kind of stuff. And then going hand in hand to have a drink together, So I think that there is some cultural side to that, but that whole area around argument, I just in the last little bit, like there's been 2 or 3 times when somebody says, well, I don't want to argue about it. And there wasn't an argument. It was, what's your point of view? And if your point of view was different, then somehow that was an argument. So yeah, that's jumbled. That's not articulated very well, but okay.
I think that to me, at least that was very clear. I think argument has become sort of this dirty word and associated with being emotional. And so to argue with someone is to be really emotional, and we don't want to be emotional in spaces, really that internalizing of white supremacy culture, we have to be objective. And so it's unprofessional to kind of have emotion, and arguments are emotional. I know in a previous role a long time ago, I had a boss who would use words like can we have a chat versus can we have a conversation? And she specifically gave meaning to these words of a chat is very informal and we're just hanging out, having a chit chat. A conversation, maybe we'll be disagreeing, maybe not, but because this is so internalized within all of us. So thank you for sharing.
Oh,
Sorry, Danielle, Khan?
yeah, I think Julia has her hand up. So go ahead, Julia.
Okay.
I just wanted to add something, but you go ahead.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting because we're a lived experience organization. And so we lean heavily into lived experience and we honor this whole process of lived experience. So it's very interesting. And the conundrum for me in my head is, okay, so what I've done, a lot of what I've done in the last 6 years in this organization as a director and now as an executive director is push for the quality data while still honoring the lived experience because we work in a system. And this, like, it's just, again, it's just like, okay, we work in a system that requires this in order to legitimize the lived experience that we bring forward. Like, it's just so connected. And, so it's like our job here is to really balance that, and one of the things I'm so proud that we've done is as we've been pushing, we pushed the envelope with data, and I'm proud of it. It's great. I'm super proud. My husband is a data analyst, and so I've been learning a lot. He created a dashboard for me as a volunteer. Because he works in health systems. And so that's great. But the thing that I'm really proud of is that we put together lived experience voices and it's called Through Their Eyes. And it's the experiences that have been shared with us through the last 5 years of this programming that we've put together through our survey data. And that is what I'm most proud of, And so, like, when we put that together, that just felt like, okay, we're doing the right thing. But it is really this mind trip of having to balance all of these different things because if we're going to be successful as a nonprofit organization that works with healthcare organizations, we also have to do the thing. We have to do the dance. Well, also, it gets really hard. No wonder I am tired.
Systemic
Yes.
paternalism. No, thank you for sharing. You summarized it. I think everyone's feelings here so succinctly. Daniela, and then I'll introduce our interactive activity.
Yeah, I just wanted to add because I thought it was really interesting, Janet, what you were saying about advocacy, because it just kind of made me think about, how impactful somebody can be when they're sharing the impacts, the personal impacts, and how government, you were talking about government would need it presented in a very specific way that was kind of quite depersonalized for it to have impact. So just thinking about that and thinking about how then it limits the possibility of how impactful that advocacy can be, right? Because it's only received in a certain way. So you've got to kind of strip it of all the personalization, put it into quantitative measures that will be valued in some way. So I just think it was just an interesting thought about it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, thanks for adding. I just realized, Rita, you haven't had an opportunity to share. Did you want to add anything before I continue? We're a small group today.
I was thinking about the top down, and it's been, if you look at like the last 5 years or so, pre and post COVID, and during COVID, there became this piece where, leaders became more vulnerable because everybody was in the same situation of fear and insecurity and so there was kind of a shift actually in being a very understanding kind of leader. Um, and now we're seeing a shift back and of course everything to do with idea. And now there's a shift away, which you've touched on. So I was just thinking about that top-down approach because the top-down, it kind of went away a bit, and now I feel like it's really coming back. And some examples could be like even, the workplaces where they're saying you have to be back in the office full time. Like it's like that all or none. Maybe it's your 2 days in the office, and all of a sudden it's gone from 2 to 5. There's not even anything graduated. And they're in a situation where they can just do that. So I'm giving you a month And for
Mhm.
folks who have different situations, having flexible environments made such a difference over the last X amount of time. So seeing that top down, and for us, we have a culture committee that's not run by HR. It is run by a group of folks who have joined from different units that want to make a difference in our workplace culture. And because it's not top down, our CEO does join, but she doesn't run it. I mean, she's
Oh.
kind of like a colleague. So that's where it makes a difference because then you can shape your work environment based on those who are living it and not necessarily in situations where they're all leaders and can kind of make those shifts. So the impact uh, is more tangible and it's felt then across the organization as opposed to, well, this looks good, so we're just going to do it because we think it's good. They have a say in it and they represent the staff. That's all I wanted to share.
No, thank you. That is wonderful. And that actually segues amazingly into our interactive activity in terms of this is something you've implemented to kind of combat these elements of white supremacy culture within your organization. Perhaps that's not what you called it, but yeah, that actually segues amazing. So I will share my screen. Thank you for sharing. Oh, the interactive activity. Oh, I get too excited and then the button doesn't work. There we go. So I promise this connects. So I'm going to go over the 10 principles of disability justice and sort of connect that back with what we've been discussing earlier. Is this a concept that anyone, we're all within this sector, so is this something that people are familiar with, kind of?
Mm.
No problem. I just didn't want to, I'm not a man, but I always say mansplain if everybody needs this inside out. So let me explain then. So the 10 principles of disability justice. So these were created in 2005, and this was created by two racialized disabled activists, Hattie Byrne, Hattie Byrne, Mia Mingus, and Stacey Milburn. And so they launched this framework of disability justice. And so this was to expand on the concept of disability rights movement, which they felt was not intersectional from their lived experience. And so this was sort of meant to be all-encompassing of disability rights, looking at it from like a more holistic approach. And so the 10 principles they've come up with, there's a slide for each one to kind of go into a bit of details. So the first one being intersectionality. So there's an acknowledgement that each person has multiple identities and that each identity can be a site of privilege or oppression. So the social location, as we've discussed way back in the earlier session. And so this understands that the mechanical workings of oppression and how they output shift depending on characteristics in any given institutional or interpersonal interaction, the very experiences of disability itself being shaped by race, gender, class, gender expression, historical moment, relationship to colonization, and more, everything on the power wheel and then some. The second principle is the leadership of the most impacted. So this is the acknowledgement that ableism exists in the context of other historical systems of oppression as well, racism, sexism, and more isms. And so in order to truly have liberation, we must be led by those who we know who know the most about these systems and how they work. So people at the most impacted intersection. The third is anti-capitalist politic. This is my favorite one. So they are anti-capitalist at the very nature of, it says our, I took this from their direct credence from their website. So the very nature of their bodies and minds to resist conforming to a capitalist normative level of production. It understands that there's a belief that human worth is not dependent on what and how much a person can produce. And it's a critique on the concept of labor as defined by able-bodied supremacy, white supremacy, and gender normativity. It's the understanding that capitalism is a system that promotes private wealth accumulation for some at the expense of others. Four, the commitment to cross-movement organizing. So understanding that there's a necessity to have cross-movement solidarity, that disability justice shifts on how social justice movements understand disability. And so some of the key movements they highlight is solidarity with environmental justice, gender justice as two kind of prominent ones, and then more. Recognizing wholeness, so valuing individuals for who they are. It kind of connects back to the first one in terms of understanding the different parts of a person's social location. It's understanding that individuals have inherent worth outside capitalist notions of productivity, and the acknowledgement that someone has an internal experience composed of their own thoughts, sensations, emotions, fantasies, perceptions, and idiosyncrasies. Today's not the day for me to get that word. That's okay. We're throwing away perfectionism as a tenant, so you know what I mean. Number 6, sustainability. So pacing ourselves as a movement, again, taken from the credence. So both individually and collectively for the long term, valuing the teaching of lived experience as a critical guide and reference towards liberation and justice. 7 is close to, again, the other movement about cross-movement solidarity, but this specifically looks at cross-disability solidarity. So valuing and honoring the insights and participation of members from all disability communities. And there's a commitment between breaking down ableist, patriarchal, racist, classist isolation between people with physical impairments. Interdependence. So this is decolonizing the understanding of interdependence within our communities, seeing liberation of all systems and the land as integral to the liberation of our own communities to share the planet. So again, everyone's experience is interconnected, and decolonizing our understanding of we're sort of disconnected from land and other communities, understanding that we're all kind of interdependent on each other. 9, collective access. So creating, exploring new ways to do things, going beyond the able-bodied, able-minded normativity, removing shame from access needs, sharing responsibility for collective access needs without compromising integrity and balanced autonomy. And the last one, collective liberation. So moving together as people with mixed abilities, multiracial, multigendered, mixed class, across the orientation spectrum, where no mind, no body is left behind, honoring the long-standing legacies of resilience and resistance, which are the inheritance of all whose minds and bodies do not conform. I tried to make it a little bit less wordy, but this is what, yeah. So these are the 10 principles, and you'll have access to these slides in the portal as well. And so the interactive activity that we have is based on the tenets of white supremacy culture that we've gone through today and prior sessions. We wanted you to match some of these tenets to principles of disability justice in order to counteract it in the workplace. So as an example, maybe that's too wordy, if we take something like power hoarding, one of the principles you could use to address this in the workplace could be using the disability principle of leadership of the most impacted. So this would look like having collaborative teams to decide workplace policies, or a better example I wrote, it could be anything. And you can match as many tenets and as many principles as you would like. I will stop sharing for just a moment. So I will share a document in the chat. Oh, let me make sure it's the right link first. But the rationale behind this activity is that there is a document here for you to meet in a breakout room. It has all the tenets, because I know we went through them really quickly and you may not remember some from the last session, as well as the principles of disability justice. And so taking notes kind of however you'd like to kind of have some discussions about some of these tenets and how can they be combated with different principles. Was that explained in a way that was coherent? And so I guess we can leave it up to you all. Would you feel more comfortable like meeting, we can all sit here together, or to have a opportunity to meet without it? Yeah, so we can just stay all here.
Yeah.
That works. Does everyone have access to the document, or you're able to type in there? So for this, I don't want to lead too much. I'd love to kind of take a little bit of a back seat, but I'm curious about thoughts of what people think for tenants and the principles of disability justice, how they can be combated in the workplace. And we will edit this after to kind of share with the broader network. Would it be easier if maybe we picked a specific tenant to start with?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think I'd find it. It's like I'm just trying to go through these and it's
it's too
overwhelming.
many. That's absolutely fair. Okay, did we feel more comfortable? Maybe we'll start with ones that we did today. So we can do, what's the first one that we did today? Quantity over quality, perhaps? So I will write that on the second page. So quality over quantity. Nope, I read it backwards. Quantity over quality. There we go.
Well, you
I'm
maybe
not
wrote it
sure.
as the com as what we would use to combat it rather than
I wrote the answer.
I'm not sure if this is the direction that we're going in, what
Please.
the instructions, but I'm just, going down the list and around that issue of quantity over quality, that some does come in. Sometimes the quality of somebody's lived experience isn't quantified in a way to say that you have more experience or more skills than someone else for leadership.
Mhm.
So I think that that's that, like, what is, how to, what is the equivalent between having every day had that experience of um, not having access to things, not being listened to, all those kind of things. How does that make someone more or less capable than somebody who has a master's degree in social work?
Ah, I see.
So yeah, to
Good
in
to know.
around the leadership part. So yeah, I don't know if that's the right way what we were thinking it,
No,
but
that's
yeah, that's a thought that came to mind. So yeah.
no, thank you for sharing. I think that also connects with what Julia was mentioning earlier of the project you're most proud of. I think that that comes back to the leadership of the most impacted, of looking at people who have
Mm,
had these intersectional experiences and how can we elevate their voices. So I think
yeah.
both of
Good.
you touched on that.
Yeah.
It also kind of touches on recognizing the wholeness of people, that
Mhm.
we recognize that you can have quality work without quantity, that this is not, we're not looking at the 9 to 5, we're looking at,
Mm.
at least that's what I think that we talked about with the quantity over quality as well, just sort of like, how do we recognize people for the work that they're doing, the quality of work that they're doing, not
Mhm.
just the amount.
Mhm.
So just the wholeness of the person that's pouring into the work.
Yeah.
That's a little bit too abstract.
And could we also look at the tenant sustainability? I'm not sure,
Mhm.
but for quantity, I guess the way I see it in my brain, it's like if you're doing like the culture of urgency, which, I know in our organization, we've had lots of urgent moments come up, but it's not sustainable in the long run for pacing. Um, so that's something where it's a work in progress for us for sure.
like that. So sustainability in terms of fighting sense of urgency.
I think that's one of the things that we learned from COVID is that,
Mhm.
all of a sudden there was this urgency to do something different. We couldn't get together. We couldn't do a lot of those things that we've been able to do just before. But most of us were thinking, how do we keep doing the work? Like, how do we sustain the work in this time when there's this urgency about getting away from our practices of what we had were in place for getting together for collaboration and all those kind of things. So I think that you know no one would want COVID again, but I think what we actually learned a lot from that experience. I think we're continuing to learn that from that experience. Yeah.
I agree. With COVID, in our organization, we had some staff working out east, but primarily the main body of staff were in BC in the office. So the folks
Mm.
who were in a different location were actually didn't feel included in a lot of things, and they got forgotten. And so we were working on that actually through the culture committee when COVID happened. And then boom, all of a sudden, everyone was quite equalized in terms of being on the screen, could hear, as opposed to calling into meetings where people were
Mhm.
laughing. But if you were to ask the folks who were mainly in the office, if you said, can your staff work remotely 1 day a week? They would have been like, no, how would we know what they're doing if they were doing laundry? And really, there were some who were like, yes, I think it could work. And then there was others who were like flat out no. And then COVID was literally like, okay, tomorrow everybody's like not coming into the office. It was an overnight thing. And it really demonstrated that we can adapt and when we have to. And we sped up that adaption by, I think, what did they say, 10, 15 years away. But it came at a cost too, because it was quite stressful. People were working like in their bathrooms and, but it really did show resiliency and creativity and adaptability. So the good things that came out of it was a more flexible and understanding work environment where it didn't have to necessarily be a traditional 8:30 to 4:30, two breaks, lunch, etc.
That's a really good one. I put that under either or.
Okay.
I think.
Can I add something? Just something kind of interesting that came. So I was thinking about like with the COVID piece and the sustainability and the urgency, I think it's also the quantity over quality is the amount, right? The amount of work. Because I think especially in these kinds of organizations and nonprofits, it's not only do it now or do it yesterday, it's the amount is not actually reasonable, the amount that you need to do. Right. But it's like we're in a system where it's like the funder says, do this. So, okay, we need to do this. And I think your point about COVID, Rita, it really speaks to that because it's like everybody just kind of went along in the system and this is how it is. And no, we don't work from home and no, that's not possible. Like that's the system that we were taught works. And then all of a sudden with COVID, it's like, oh, hang on a second, you can do things differently. But we needed something so extreme to shake us up and kind of show that. So I think what's interesting about that is like, how do we then make those changes without needing this extreme thing to happen? Like, can we proactively look at our systems and be able to shift them? Yeah.
I think
Just to add on quantity too, like I feel, for me anyway, there's like a barrage of different sources of information. So it's coming from Teams, email, text. So sometimes I'm like, where was that? Before it was kind of like, I will just say mainly email, or maybe you had something printed, but there's like a huge volume of information that comes immediately. It's not slow. It's coming quickly. And I think it's hard to kind of untangle and focus when you have so many data points coming from all over at a very fast pace. I think there's been research on just how much the volume we are experiencing compared to before. And I don't know if that necessarily gets addressed as well fully in the workplace.
That's a really, really big one, I think, for a lot of us. On your
Mhm.
phone, or, I'll just take off the evening, I'm done. But then the emails on your phone, and then the text, and then the Slack, and the Hoot, and the whichever. If I throw out all my technology, then I'll get the mail like in a week, and it will be work. So,
Yeah, I think that you made a really good point, Rita, about like there's so much coming at us all the time, and we just don't have the filter to be able to say this is important, this is not important. So, like even just the like emails, for example, and right now like programs, and we use Office 365. I'm not sure whether this would happen with everybody or not, but it starts deciding what's important. And so sometimes you get there's a mark against your emails that AI thinks this was the most important for you, and you could miss a really important email down below. And it's just by the time that you get so far down your list, or what end you start at and whether you move up or not, then there's a whole other batch that comes in. Like one day I was really happy that I got my emails down at the end of the day down to only 20 in my inbox. And then the next morning I had something like 76. And three-quarters of them were not, like they were
mhm.
just reply alls and all of those kind of things, but it's still there. It's still um, filling up my inbox. So yeah.
And your time just to
Yeah,
go through those
exactly. Yeah,
replies.
yeah, yeah.
I think you both touched on 2 points there. That is in quality, quantity over quality, but also the worship of the written word to have all of this coming at you. But
Mhm.
I think you made a good point of in terms of like deciding what's important. I think that can be connected to anti-capitalist politic, because really that's what the whole system is that's keeping it going. But yeah, I think those are excellent points. Did anyone have any thoughts on what's one we haven't done yet? Paternalism. For context again, that's when those in power are making decisions for those who are most marginalized. They feel they know what's best for those that are marginalized, and then are able to make those decisions without the consent of those who are marginalized or oppressed. Or if there's a way we can see this in workplace culture. I think on a small scale, when I used to work in retail, this would look like the rewards that were given to staff. So I don't know if anyone's worked retail, or kind of these jobs sometimes you have in high school, but the infamous pizza party or whichever of we're celebrating you and we're telling you how we're celebrating you. And half the staff is lactose intolerant and gluten. And so this is not a celebration that we like at all. And we're supposed to be thankful for this, even though well, it's actually more of a burden for us than anything. So that's a small way I can see that in workplace culture.
I think
Sorry,
because of,
can you,
oh, sorry. Sorry.
oh, sorry, can you just remind us of the definition again?
Journalism?
Yes,
Absolutely. Let me go right back to the slide. I can read it direct.
I know you said it, and yet my
No,
brain forgot to hold on to it.
that's okay. We are not holding you to perfectionism and having to remember and hold space for everything all at once. Uh,
Sorry, Janet, I interrupted you.
Paternalism. So it's the practice of those in power making all the decisions for the people they govern, employ, or are responsible for. So they cannot or do not have their own ability to make decisions. It's said to be in their best interest.
Okay.
Janet.
I was just thinking about how
Mhm.
because the people that we support, like that people just intellectual disabilities and their families, they are exposed to that all the time.
Mhm.
Someone else, like there's really rare situations where someone has that freedom to try new things and make mistakes and and live that. And I realize like sometimes it's I can see now where we were rather paternalistic to a young man who worked for us and used a wheelchair, and how sometimes we made a big deal about making sure he was somehow included. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mm.
he would kind of say, don't worry about it. The only thing I need help with
Mm.
is that lock on your door at the back where I park. It's too high. And I can't lock it from the outside. And when the parking lot was icy, he asked if he could work at home because it was hard. He used a chair, but he also
Mm.
walked some as well too. And so, but he had to almost like he felt, I think, like he almost had to plead his case.
Mm.
And when we talked about it, and I said, oh no, like you don't have, like he thought he had to get the permission of his immediate supervisor who didn't happen to be that day. And I said, no, of course not. We would do that for anybody. And there were people that typically would not have had any issue with walking. All of us who walked across that icy driveway had a problem with it, so it wasn't in him, but it was like he was thinking he had to ask
Mm.
permission to, and it was, and we don't have, most of the people work in our office on a regular basis and work remotely as needed. Like even today,
Mhm.
I'm at home because I've had 4 virtual meetings, and it's much easier on my body to be at home so I can stand up and walk in between and those kind of things to be able to. And so we've always been able to do that. But there's something like about the like our organization is 65 years old, and for 60 years everybody came to an office. And so it's almost like it's
Mm.
ingrained without even being said that this has always been workplace based kind of stuff. So yeah.
No, thank you for sharing. What do you think, if you could point to any, multiple, or one of the principles of disability justice, which ones do you think, as you were kind of explaining the solution there of, this kind of affects everyone, are there any that kind of stand out to you that you think combat this well?
Well, there's a couple of them, and I just think of like
Mhm.
independence is kind of an obvious one, but I also think about recognizing wholeness because he recognized his wholeness, and sometimes part of who he was is that there were times when he couldn't navigate certain situations, and so that's just he didn't. For him, that's not a big deal. That's who he is, and so it's the environment that needs to change. But I think that um, that I don't think you value your independence or interdependence until it's challenged, until you've been in that situation. So yeah.
Very good point. Um, I'm just checking how we're doing for time.
And can I add just one more thought? I guess I'm just thinking about in that context of paternalism, that maybe one of the principles that could be helpful there is leadership of the most impacted, right? Like how are we bringing people that are most impacted by the decisions into the process of decision making so that the decisions are being informed by people who are the most impacted as opposed to people in power making the decisions, like you were saying, Amira, about pizza parties are going to be a reward for the staff, but the staff don't actually want or appreciate those pizza parties. Just yeah, I think that
Oh,
could be
thank
one
you.
as well. Yeah.
And it's
Just
the
to
building it
extend,
into regular routines.
just wanted to add on paternalism. I was thinking
Yes.
about this, and depending on like how a workplace structure is, I know I've seen this in, previous organizations where there's a lot of stock in titles. And so depending on how you're hired and who's hired into what position and how the positions are structured, um, and whether your leadership is reflects who you're serving. But there is, I have seen it where if someone's in a very leadership position, they might discount an opinion or a perspective of someone based on title, not on the person themselves, but they're like, oh, if they're an assistant, or oh, why is this assistant asking me? But actually, the people who do the most work know the best. And so it depends on how your organization's set up to listen to uh, colleagues and not be hierarchical in thinking. So that's that top down where they're like discount. So it's not even that they don't even take their perspectives into consideration because they don't think it's important because they sit at a different level.
Very good point. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I got exactly what you said. But that's a really good one that didn't even come to mind for me. Um, Maybe we can do objectivity, a minute or two on objectivity before we kind of wrap it all up. But this has been really good. Yeah, does anyone have anything on how objectivity comes in the workplace or how we can combat that?
Can you read the definition of that one again, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Objectivity. The belief that there is such a thing as being objective or neutral, that there's a way to view something with a lack of any bias, judgment, or prejudice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think for us, when we just had an example of this, which was sometimes you think you can hire people or promote people from within without bias and objectivity, you think you can do it, but you can't. And it's a really hard process to be able to come to terms with all of your own internalized ideas about who somebody is because of the work they've already produced, and then trying to translate that. So it's almost easier when you don't know it, right? You can kind of come at an interview unbiased, but it's way more challenging. And it was really hard. And for those of us that were doing the hiring for this individual, both of us found it incredibly difficult. And it was like it's almost like we wanted to go around and check with people, right? We wanted to just confirm what biases we already had. And so we're like, well, but they performed this way, and these are the touch points in this position. So how is that going to translate over here, instead of allowing them to be who they are in this position, and then to just step into the next one without baggage? Because I have to admit, there's baggage, and I'm having trouble offloading that baggage because it feels significant, and that's the work that I noticed that we're really doing, and I'm not sure which one. I don't know which part of the work we're doing. I just know it's been hard. And they've now started, they're just starting next week, and I think that for me, I'm finally in a better headspace of, okay, I'm clean slate, you get to be who you're going to be. But this is just really in the real time for us right now, where we're struggling with this particular issue. Yeah,
that's a great example.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you. Well, what are some of the steps that you've taken? Because again, we're not aiming for perfection. We don't need that.
Right.
But or if anyone else has ideas,
well, I was just thinking too, it could also connect to kind of the either or. Right, because it's kind of like either the person's in that role or they're in that role, and like we have trouble kind of like bridging how those things kind of connect and overlap together. It's a really interesting example. Yeah.
Anyone have any suggestions on what some steps you could take to start to combat that? Because I don't know that there is a right answer.
I think that's a good point. There rarely is a right answer. There's, yeah.
I think when I recognize in myself, and I'm really challenging myself to look at sort of these 10 principles, sustainability actually probably rise to the top of the list, because as we become a sustainable organization, our desire is to lift people up within their lived experience and make sure that provide opportunities for growth and promotion, regardless of how they've performed in the past. Everybody has a chance. And so that for me has been a large piece of being able to sort of work through some of the harder stuff. And admittedly, in my position, I don't hear I don't hear the good stuff. I hear the hard stuff, so their supervisors just, it all comes up the chain and I hear all the diluted, difficult stuff. And so also going to the other people, so I guess that would be leadership of the most impacted. So trying to, going to the individuals, like going to the actual supervisor and having a conversation with them. It's very different than the next person in line, right? So it all gets diluted and it's a bit of a game of telephone. And so that's been some of the work that I've done, is go and talk to the direct supervisor, and look, there's some things that you have to ask questions about, but then being open to a different way of thinking.
That's wonderful. I didn't have an answer at all for that. So yeah. I learned a lot from this. Wow, that's a really good idea, actually. I love that. I think we're good for time, unless anyone had a final point that they wanted to add to this.
It's been a great conversation.
I'm so glad.
Thank you. Yeah. Really challenging. Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, as we're wrapping up, I'm going to pass it over to Daniela, but I put the link in the chat again, so you'll have access to this one. We'll send out a similar document to kind of everyone else to read over, and they can add. But yeah, if you wanted to add anything else to this when the session's over or throughout the week, you also have access as well. All right, Daniela, so hand it over to you.
Thanks, Amira. Just gonna share here. Yeah, so what a great conversation, and we'd love to ask you, how do you think you want to take this forward after today's session? So how will you apply the learning? What's next for you? Just love to hear a couple of thoughts. And I mean, I feel like we were already doing this in the conversation, which is really valuable. But just thinking about, what might be next for you after today's conversation. How do you think you'd want to take this forward? And what support might you need to be able to successfully implement the actions you want to take?
So for me, one of the key pieces for our organization is wellness. We have a group that focuses on it. And I think I'm going to look at wellness with the lens of paternalism and white supremacy, and see if there's pieces there that we can address in some of our wellness activities. That's one. And then two, I have to do a lot more learning and reading, but I think from a practical application, I'll start with that. And then I'll also be sharing with the team, meaning like my leader and the CEO, some of the takeaways, and think about that from an HR perspective is what can we do we can't do all 10 things, so I have to pick like one or two so I don't get overwhelmed, but based on what I think would be most valuable in our organization.
Yeah, that sounds great, really. Yeah, we don't want to say, okay, do 10 things, right? And do it yesterday. It should have all been done yesterday. Should have already done
Go
it.
perfectly.
We're not trying to perpetuate that. Yeah, what about Julia and Janet? What are your thoughts around applying this?
Well, I think that for me that, and just in terms of sharing about the recognition that, we have staff members that are struggling with some of these issues, that right, we've all been socialized. We're swimming in water that we don't even know we're wet, right? Like we're just swimming and don't know what the substance is. But it is white supremacy. We're all swimming in it. And so we can't always recognize it. And so in being sensitive to that fact, but also not, because I think that I have the tendency to sometimes be like, oh, well, by pushing back, am I doing this right? And so this was good confirmation of, okay, just continue to push back gently, recognizing, I think your point, forget who made the point, but the point that was made was that we all have been social. I think Danielle, you were saying we've all been socialized into this. And so I tend to get frustrated. And so how can I facilitate conversation, offloading some of the frustration, while committing to being able to say, how do we push back in a reasonable and meaningful way, asking questions about why this person or these individuals need so much. So I think that's some really practical takeaways that I can share with our director.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, Julian. It's great to hear that the conversation kind of affirmed, your instincts and what you're already doing, because I think it can be really hard when you're pushing back against the norms, right? To kind of like, because the majority of what's coming at us is the norm. And so it's hard to forge that different path. I think it's important to have support doing that. And that's also, what these sessions are for. So yeah. Yeah, Janet, what about you?
Well, I just keep thinking about an event that we are having in the 18th, 19th of June, around some of the local solidarity work that we are doing and bringing together people from a variety of different social justice organizations. And there's a number of these things that I want to think about what we're doing based on this, is like, okay, so there's the white supremacy culture is really even the way we bring people together is kind of in that sort of space. So it's work. It's a good lens to look through when we're trying to do the work. And we've had we've been doing this for a few years, 2 or 3 times a year. The people have people together. There's a small core that has been coming all along, but there's been a lot more people who haven't come back a second time and stuff. And so just asking ourselves those questions, why didn't they? And sometimes we know that people, might have worked for an organization, they no longer work there, and there's all of those kinds of things. But just to be a little bit more intentional about even how we invite people to share their experiences and their stories. So yeah, so it's helpful. That's what those are my thoughts that are rolling around in my head right now. So
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I think that's really the key, right? Is that intentionality and like the lens that we're bringing to things. And then through that, it's a process of unfolding the next actions. So that's amazing. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. So for our next steps, we have our next session, which is around community engagement. So that's kind of funny. It fits really well with what you were saying, Janet. And as Amira said earlier, these all kind of connect together. And that will be Wednesday, July 30th at the same time. So just want to do a really quick Zoom poll to end before we do our closing. So just let me, oops. Okay, I'm just gonna do that one quickly. If you can just take a minute here to complete this second poll, that would be great. Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, I would love to just do some takeaways from the session today. So what are you taking away from today's session? I'd love to just give each of you a minute to share what's been your biggest takeaway. There may have been a lot of takeaways because I think there was a lot of information, a lot of good conversation, but what's your biggest takeaway from today's session? Maybe Rita, if we start with you, see you first on the screen. That'd be great.
I'd
Yeah.
say for me, so thanks for the 2.0 version of the extension of the white supremacy and the paternalism, I should say. So I'll do more reading on that, but I'd say the biggest takeaway is just the principles of disability justice, and more importantly, how our organization can embody or start to look at changing a very systemic way that we've been operating, for over 40 years, right? So that doesn't happen overnight. So just small little steps that we can do intentionally. But I think first for me, the takeaway is I need to do a lot more reading and learning before even planning.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Rita. And yeah, your organization is not alone in having operated like this for many, many, many years, right? So, yeah, Julia, what about you? What's your biggest takeaway from today?
I think the biggest thing is that I feel like sometimes I feel so powerless. And so today I feel like there are tools, there's ways to combat this white supremacy that's been scaffolded through our lives and our organizations and society and everywhere we move. And so, so much of the time I think about how do we start dismantling that, and it becomes so overwhelming and you just don't know where to start. So I feel like this session has given me a place to say, okay, well, it's possible to start. It's possible to start. It's possible to start that we can do something, and it will be small, and it will feel sometimes insignificant and hard, but there are things that we can do. So that has given me a lot of hope.
Amazing. Yeah, and absolutely, it can be really overwhelming. I mean, we just looked at, 4 things the last time and like 4 things today, but there's so much. But I think it is the key thing of, okay, so what are the tools I can use and how can I start step by step, one step at a time, rather than kind of getting lost in the overwhelm. Yeah, thank you. Janet, what about you? What's your takeaway?
Something that I think what I take away is how important it is to have these conversations. So I feel really lucky that I've been part of this to be able to hear other people's experiences and really cause me to think deeper about something. One of the things that keeps sticking in my head is about the worship of the written word, and it for me, like we've incorporated storytelling with some youth into our work as well too, and it just really reinforces that idea that storytelling is so important. And but I think that just having opportunity to have these kind of conversations are really important. I really appreciate everyone's input from today. And I know that tonight I'll be thinking about something else I took away from today. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, it's so good to hear that because that's really what the space is for. And we can't do it alone, right? So we need to come together and support each other and just give time and space, like the beginning of the reflection and then continuing with it afterwards in our own ways. So, yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for your time today and for your engagement. Amira, is there any last words you want to offer before we close?
I'm just so happy to be here. This was an amazing conversation, and I took away a lot as well. So thank you for including me in this space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
everyone. So,
Hope to
okay.
see
Bye-bye.
you in July.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.